Eevee and all of its Eeveelutions are some of the most beloved Pokemon in the entire franchise. However, their competitive viability, especially in the card game, has kind of been all over the place throughout the years, never really getting too many chances to shine. However, in the WotC era, there were a ton of Eevee and Eeveelution cards since there wasn't really a big pool of Pokemon to choose from, and everybody loved them. However, as stated, they're kind of all over the place when it comes to how viable they actually were. So I thought it'd be fun to rank them in a tier list and showcase some of the best and some of the worst evolutions that the WotC era had to offer. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it, and we're just going to go one by one. However, first, I need to state my criteria. So, the first thing is we are not judging the Eevees or Eeveelutions by whether or not they were in any competitive decks throughout the WotC era. However, we are judging them based on their attacks, their abilities, retreat cost, as well as their HP. But because of that, that means that just because an Eevee or Eeveelution might have one really good attack, if the rest of the card isn't that good, then it's not going to make up for it. We are judging as a whole, on average, how good the card could actually be. So, now let's get into it. First up, we have Eevee from Aquapolis. Now, Aquapolis was the second set of the E series and introduced a couple of Eevee and Eeveelution cards, but this Eevee in particular is not that good, unfortunately. It has two attacks, both for just a single colorless, which sounds pretty awesome, and it has a decent stat lineup as well. It has 50 HP, 1 retreat cost, so on paper, with just that information, it sounds pretty good actually. But when you get into the attacks, you sort of realize where I'm coming from. Its first attack is Charge Up, which on a coin flip, you can search your deck for an energy and attach it to the Eevee. But if you're playing an Eeveetron deck, then you're not necessarily going to know which Eeveelution you're going to get through draws, especially at this period of time and rotation in Standard. There weren't a whole lot of ways to consistently set up your Eeveelutions, so having a coin flip for an energy, especially, and not doing any damage is not that good. And then its second attack, lo and behold, also a coin flip. It does do 20 damage, but on a coin flip. If you fail the coin flip, the attack does nothing. So essentially, in my mind, I see it as sure, it's a one cost for both of its attacks, but if both of them can fail, then essentially you're paying one energy to do nothing half the time, which to me is not good. So unfortunately for this Eevee, we are actually getting our first F tier. I don't like this Eevee. I love the artwork, but unfortunately the artwork is not part of today's criteria. Next up, we have the Espeon from Aquapolis. So it has an ability called Energy Return, which allows you to take one energy attached to one of your Pokemon and put it back in your hand, which isn't a crazy ability, but it's a nice one. It's good utility, and in an era with a good amount of special energy, this is pretty good. Mind you, I think in the Neo to Skyridge standard rotation format, there weren't too many special energies to really take advantage of outside of like the dark and metal energies. But if you're playing an Eeveetron deck, returning a dark energy can be extremely valuable if it's on an Umbreon that you already know is probably going to get KO'd soon. So I really like this ability. And then it has a pretty decent attack, too, for just a Psychic and 2 colorless. It does 30 damage, and then you flip a coin for every damage counter on your opponent's Pokemon, their active Pokemon, that is, and then it does 10 damage for each heads on top of that. So, in the long game, like, towards, like, the mid to end game, I feel like this Espeon just gets pretty crazy, just ends up being really useful, does a lot of damage, and has an amazing ability for an Eeveetron deck at least. And honestly, I feel like maybe its ability would even be better suited for a non-Eeveetron deck, like just a splash of Eevee and Espeon. But we also got to go over the stats, which make it pretty crazy. It's got 80 HP. It's weak to Psychic, which kind of sucks because Psychic is always one of the better types. but it has no retreat cost, and no retreat cost in the WotC era is bananas. Its free retreat cost is always one of the best things in the Pokemon TCG, but in the WotC era, because the retreat works differently, it is just so much better. So with that being said, I'm actually going to put the Espeon in A tier. I just noticed the tiers are a little messed up here. 1 second. Okay, hopefully that fixed things. Espeon is now in the A tier. Our first member of a pretty high tier. Honestly, this Espeon, the more I look at it, the more I love it. And I think originally I was planning on putting this in B tier, so it's just kind of crazy looking at it and seeing how good it actually is. But next up, we got Umbreon from Aquapolis as well. So this Umbreon has a very similar stat lineup to the Espeon from Aquapolis, but it differs in a couple ways. So it has the 80 HP, but it is weak to fighting and resists Psychic. So the Espeon didn't have a resistance. This one does. And resisting Psychic, as stated, Psychic is a pretty good type typically. And in the WotC era, I'm not sure too much about the Neo to Skyridge format, but I would assume Psychic is still a pretty viable type. I know in the Neo era, Psychic isn't too crazy, but it's always one of those types that just tends to have good effects on their cards. However, the trade-off is since it has a resistance, it gets a retreat cost of 1, which isn't the end of the world and is still fine, but I thought I'd bring that up as just a reference point of how good free retreat can be versus just a single retreat cost. It also has an ability called Dark Moon, which is very long and complex, but what it actually does is pretty simple. If Umbreon has any dark energy attached to it, you can look at your opponent's hand and then shuffle any number of cards from their hand into their deck equal to the number of dark energy attached to Umbreon. You can do this once per turn. It's basically just a way to control what your opponent has. It's a good way to get rid of important trainers, evolutions, any sort of special energy, anything that would help them out. And then it has an attack for 3 colorless energy called Shadow Bind, which does 30 damage, and then the defending Pokemon can't retreat next turn, which isn't a crazy powerful effect. It's actually a pretty common one found among dark types, but it's still useful in certain situations, especially if you're about to get a KO. It forces them to use a trainer that they otherwise wouldn't have, like a switch card or something of the sorts. It kind of puts them in an awkward situation, basically. The benefit of it is, of course, the fact that it's a dark type. Even though 30 damage for 3 energy is kind of mid, the fact that it's dark type means that you can attach the darkness energy. It'll get the buff of the extra 10 damage, and you can sort of ramp up to a 50 damage attack, which is more likely to put them in that KO range to make it more awkward for them. It's honestly mainly going to be used for its ability. Its ability is really powerful for control. With all of that, I'm going to put it in the B tier. It's still very good, but I think just the fact that its attack isn't as reliable as the Espeon's, and it has the 1 retreat cost, as crazy it is to say that 1 energy makes the difference, it kind of does in this situation. Next up, we've got the Eevee from Team Rocket. So this Eevee is pretty standard. It's got 40 HP, 1 retreat cost, weak to fighting, resist Psychic. That's all fairly standard for an Eevee card. Really, any basic normal Pokemon that evolves, that's about the stat line you're going to see. Now, most of the Eevees have 50 HP though, so it does have 10 less HP, but its attacks kind of make up for it. So it has a 1 colorless tackle, does 10 damage, nothing else. Very simple, very plain, but it gets the job done. And then it has Sand Attack for 2 colorless energy. It also does 10 damage, but then on a coin flip, the defending Pokemon's attack may or may not work next turn. Personally, I think this Eevee is fine. I don't really see it as being really good or really bad one way or the other. I think it's fine, middle of the road. If its second attack did 10 or 20 more damage, I think it would be bumped up like a crazy amount. Because it's 2 energy and only does the 10 damage as well, it's going to find its way in C tier. Next up, we have Dark Espeon, which is both one of the craziest cards I've ever seen, and also the highest HP of the Dark Eeveelutions as far as the WotC era is concerned. So Dark Espeon has 60 HP, is weak to Psychic, and has free retreat cost. But where it really shines is its attacks. So for one colorless, it has Gouge, which does 10 damage, and then on a coin flip, it either does 10 damage more or just 10 damage, which, to be honest, for a coin flip attack, that's a pretty favorable outcome. On a coin flip, maybe you do 20 damage for a single colorless, which is kind of crazy. Or you just do 10 damage for a single colorless, which is about standard. That's, pretty normal and pretty good. However, its second attack is where it really shines. So for one Psychic and two colorless, it has Psy Splash, which does 10 damage to each Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field with an energy, and it does 10 damage for each energy attached to them. That is insane. That is like an absolutely baffling effect, and in the end game, that is crazy. That can be game determinative. Oh my god, is it terrifying. It is an insanely powerful card, and it is going to find its way straight into A tier. Not quite S tier. I guess I should have mentioned, I'm considering S tier as the one and only best Eevee or Eeveelution. And Dark Espeon is really good, but it's not the best. There are still plenty more to see. Such as Dark Flareon, which has the Rage attack, which is one of my favorites, and it's cheaper than ever for just one energy. And if you're not familiar, Rage does 10 damage plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on you, and in the Rocket to Destiny, or the Rocket On format rather, you can use a Darkness energy for that one cost, and now you're making it 20 damage plus 10 more damage for each counter on it. The downside being it only has 50 HP. Like, that is really bad. I think that's the real reason why the Rocket Eevee got 40 HP, is so that the Dark Eeveelutions would at least look somewhat better. Because of that, it means that at most, assuming you're only using the one Darkness energy even, at most you can do is 50 damage, which is kind of embarrassing. However, you add a second Darkness energy on there, and then you're looking a little bit better, because then at the very least, you're doing 30 damage for 2 Darkness energy if you have no damage counters. And then everyone after that is just cherries on top, but then you're wasting a lot of resources, and then it's not that good. Its other attack, Playing with Fire, requires you to have fire energy cards attached to it. It specifically says cards, so Rainbow Energy does not cut it. And it's a 2 fire cost, and then on a coin flip, you either discard a card, and the attack does 30 damage plus 20 more, or on Tails, you don't discard the card, and it just does 30 damage. Which 30 damage for 2 fire is fine. It's pretty standard. 2 of a specific color for 30 is pretty much the standard for evolved Pokemon. Seaking has a similar attack, just doesn't have any effect. So being able to have that option to discard to do more is pretty nice, I guess, because 2 for 50 is pretty nuts. However, again, you're having to discard fire energy cards specifically, and there's not a whole lot of ways to get those back. So personally, I think this card is fine. It's about middle of the road to me, so I'm going to put it in C tier. Next up, we have Dark Jolteon, which Dark Jolteon would be so much better if it didn't have 50 HP. That's really the thing that holds me back with a lot of the Dark Pokemon, is they're just so vulnerable. However, Dark Jolteon has some pretty insane attacks. For 1 lightning energy, it does 20 damage, and then on a coin flip, your opponent's next attack does nothing to the Jolteon. And then for 2 lightning and a colorless, it does 30 damage, and then on a coin flip, your opponent's Pokemon is either paralyzed or Jolteon does 10 damage to itself. 10 damage when you only have 50 HP is a lot of damage. That's 20% of your health. So that coin flip, kind of a scary one. However, the paralysis is pretty nice. I think that's the best ratio you're going to find outside of Electabuzz from base set specifically. For that, I am going to put it in C tier, but it's probably going to stay towards the top of C tier. Literally just 10 more HP, and I think I would put it in B tier, but 50 is so low. Next, we have Dark Vaporeon, which is the last of the Dark Eevees. It is the only Dark Eeveelution to have 60 HP, which is what I really wish Jolteon had had. Nonetheless, it has 60 HP, still has the 1 retreat cost, weak to lightning, has 3 colorless energy for its first attack, Bite, which does 30 damage, which 3 for 30 is fine, I guess. Typically, the way you want to see it is for one colorless, yes, you expect 10. For two colorless, you expect 20 to 30. For three, you're expecting 30 to 40, and either a nice effect or anything else. 30 damage for 3 is fine, especially since it's colorless. That means you can use your darkness energy to put it on there, which I personally feel like was maybe what they were intending, that it would be a decent attack with a darkness energy, but regardless, it's a fine attack. It's okay. And then you have Whirlpool, which for 2 water, 1 colorless, does 20 damage, and you can choose one of the energy cards attached to the defending Pokemon and discard it. So it's along the lines of Duck Drought, and for that reason, it's fairly good, but the 20 damage for 3 energy on a 60 body really hurts. So I'm going to have to put it in the C tier with the rest of the Rocket Eevees, unfortunately. Next up, we have the Eevee from Neo Discovery. Now, this Eevee has an absolutely amazing ability called Energy Evolution. Whenever you attach an energy card to Eevee, you can flip a coin, and if heads, search your deck for an Eeveelution that is the same type as the energy you attached. Now, the best application with this ability is to attach a Rainbow Energy in the Rocket On format, because the Rainbow Energy is considered every type while it is attached, or when it is attached, but of course can only be used as one type at a time, but that doesn't matter for this, because whereas it does the 10 damage to Eevee, since it counts as any energy, that means you can search your deck for any of the Pokemon that evolve from Eevee. There are, of course, the other Eevees as well, so you could attach a Water, a Lightning, a Fire, a Psychic, but it gets a little more complex with Umbreon, because with a Darkness energy, if you fail that coin flip, then your Eevee's basically just going to be poisoned and will probably die within the next few turns, because that's just kind of how it goes. So really the best application is Rainbow Energy and just hoping for that heads. And then obviously you would still play the Darkness Energy for a deck that's running this. But nonetheless, this Eevee is really good. It has the typical Eevee lineup of 50 HP, weak to fighting, resist Psychic, but has a single retreat cost. It's pretty standard and also has a decent attack. 1 colorless, Smash Kick does 10 damage. So because everything else is standard, but its ability is amazing, it's going straight to A tier. Then we have the Holo Espeon, also from Neo Discovery. Both the Espeon and the Umbreon have the Bite attack. For 2 colorless, it does 20 damage. And then Espeon has Psychic. It does 30 damage plus 10 more damage for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. This is an attack that has been in the card game, I think, since maybe Espeon. Espeon might be the first one to get it. I'm not actually sure. But it is still an attack that we see today, usually with higher numbers. But Psychic is fairly good, and depending on the deck you're playing against, it can be very good. And it has pretty good stats as well. 80 HP, weak to Psychic, but free retreat cost. I think the only thing that sets this card back is the fact that it doesn't have a low energy option, because of the fact that unless you're playing base through Neo, the Bite attack costs 2 energy. There's no double colorless, no way to ramp up 2 colorless at the same time. I'm going to put this in B tier, but a very high B tier at that. And then we have the Holo Umbreon, also from Neo Discovery. It has the same stat lineup pretty much as the Espeon, 80 HP, has no weakness, resists Psychic, and has a single retreat cost. So typically with the Umbreon Espeon exchange, Espeon gets free retreat, and then Umbreon just doesn't have a weakness. So that's pretty standard. And then it has, like I said, the same Bite attack as the Holo Espeon. And then it has Feint attack for 2 dark, 1 colorless, that says choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and this attack does 30 damage to that Pokemon. Now, the interesting application, of course, is the fact that it has the Darkness Energy as a requirement to use the attack. Now, this is obviously very good if you are choosing to attack the defending Pokemon with this, because then it does 50. That's honestly, it's still not crazy. If that was the attack for 2 dark and a colorless, it did 30 damage, but then because the dark would do 50 damage, it would be honestly kind of bad, but it's the utility that comes along with it. The fact that you can snipe. And unfortunately, the Neogenesis print of Darkness Energy, it only applies, the damage buff only applies to the defending Pokemon. However, if you're playing this card in Neo on, through the Neo through Skyridge, then the Expedition print of Darkness Energy will apply instead, which is that any attack, regardless if it's to a defending Pokemon or not, any attack used by the Pokemon it's attached to does 10 more. So then you can snipe for 50 for just 3 energy, which at this point in time is a crazy amount to snipe for. Once again, it has a very good attack, but because its first attack is kind of mediocre, we are going to put it into B tier, but once again, a very high B tier. I'm not really sure if it is above the Espeon. For now, I'm going to say that it is actually above the Espeon, but I'm going to be rearranging the tier list a little bit towards the end. Next up, we have the non-holo Espeon from Neo Discovery. Now, for some reason, the non-holos and the holos, unlike pretty much any other set ever, for Neo Discovery, when it came to Espeon and Umbreon, the non-holos were different. They just had a completely different lineup for whatever reason. And I'm pretty sure in both cases it's for the worse. Regardless, Espeon has Quick Attack, much like the Jungle Eeveelutions, which we'll get to later. But Quick Attack says flip a coin. If heads, this attack does 10 damage plus 20 more. Otherwise, it just does 10 damage. And for 2 colorless, 10 damage versus 30 damage is really not that crazy. It's basically just a bite and with a bad and good scenario in mind, which is kind of funny. And then it has Psybeam, which does 30 damage for 2 Psychic, 1 Colorless, and then on a coin flip causes Confusion. And then it is weak to Psychic, doesn't resist anything, and has a 1 retreat cost with 70 HP. I actually kind of feel like this is the worst Espeon that we have in the WotC era. Despite that, it's still pretty good. Psybeam being able to cause Confusion. Confusion is always good in the WotC era, and generally kind of good throughout the TCG, but in the WotC era specifically, it's very good since it affects the way that retreating works. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into the C tier. And then, of course, we can't have Espeon without Umbreon, so next is the Umbreon from Neo Discovery. Also has the 70 HP, but this time, it doesn't get an extra retreat. It is just no weakness, resist Psychic, and a retreat cost of 1. Has the same quick attack as the Espeon, but its second attack is kind of cheaper. It's still 3 energy, but 1 darkness, 2 colorless. It's Pursuit. It does 30 damage, and then during your opponent's next turn, if that Pokemon tries to retreat, the attack does another 10 damage to them. So with the 1 darkness in mind, since it is doing the damage before the retreat, it actually does 20 damage. So again, it's sort of a situation of the darkness energy being good, but 3 energy for 50 damage at the end, not really that good. It's more of like psychological warfare of like, oh, should I really retreat? And there maybe could be some good pairings with this, but unfortunately, I do think this card's not that good. So I'm going to put it in the C tier, probably just before the Dark Vaporeon. Next up, we have the Eevee from Skyridge. Now, this Eevee, once again, has a pretty typical lineup. However, it is a little bit worse just because of its resistance. It doesn't have one, but otherwise it has the 50 HP, weak to fighting, 1 retreat cost. It has an attack for 1 colorless, Smash Kick, that does 10 damage, much like the Eevee from Neo Discovery. And then it has Takedown for 2 colorless, it does 30 damage, and then Eevee does 10 damage to itself. Now, 2 colorless for 30 damage is actually pretty good. Don't think there's very many attacks in the WotC era that do that. So the fact that it does 10 damage as a downside kind of makes sense and really isn't that big of a deal. There's a lot of healing cards in the Neo through Skyridge era or format. And honestly, I think this Eevee is just fine. It's not ridiculously good. It's not bad. It is middle of the road. This is basically how I view what an Eevee card should be in the WotC era as far as a starting point. So we're going to put that in the C tier, right above the Rocket Eevee, which is basically just a slightly worse version of this. Next up, we have the Skyridge Flareon. So all of the Skyridge Gen 1 Eeveelutions have the same ability. self-healing. Whenever you attach the energy of their type to them, they recover from all special conditions. So with Flareon, attach a fire, it recovers from any special condition, which is pretty good. Special conditions do kind of run rampant through the Neo Skyridge format. It's a fine ability. It doesn't hurt your opponent. It doesn't really accelerate you anywhere. It just fixes some problems. So it's fine. It's a very okay ability to have. And then it has Singe. For 1 fire energy, your opponent's Pokemon is now burned. And burn is a new stat condition in the E-Series format. So in the WotC to X and Y era, burn worked a little differently. There was basically no way to recover outside of attacks, abilities, or items, trainers, whatever. Burn worked where if the Pokemon was burned, you would flip a coin, and if heads, you would not receive any damage. If tails, you put 2 damage counters on it. Now, normally, in the modern era, if you get the heads, then your Pokemon is cured from burn after receiving damage counters regardless. And then it has a second attack called Burn Booster. For 3 colorless, it does 40 damage, and then you must discard a energy to use the attack, but if the discarded energy was fire, it does an additional 10 damage. So this is kind of like Flamethrower in base set, where it does 50 damage, but you have to discard a fire in order to use it. It's honestly fine. I don't really think it's that good, but it is okay for sure. So for that, I'm going to be putting it in the C tier, but probably behind Dark Vaporeon for now. Next, we have Jolteon from Skyridge. Now, again, it has the self-healing, attach a lightning, cures from status conditions. And then it has Thunder Shock for 10 damage, 1 lightning. You flip a coin, if heads, paralysis. Now, this is absolutely crazy, as we have seen with Lickitung and many other Pokemon in the base through Rocket era or formats, even the base through Gym format. There are tons of Pokemon with this, and they always tend to be good. So just having Thundershock is a good sign, and then it also has Thunder Spark. For 1 lightning, 2 colorless, it does 40 damage, and then 10 damage to every bench Pokemon with an energy attached. So it's kind of a weakened version of the Dark Espeon attack, where it does just 10 damage to any Pokemon with energy attached on the bench, but it also affects your Pokemon. So it is maneuverable, but because of the fact that it's kind of annoying to work around, I'm going to also put this in C tier, but quite a bit higher. I'm going to probably put this, maybe not better than no, I'd say it's better than the Dark Umbreon for sure. Next, we have the Umbreon from Skyridge, and it has a completely different ability. It has Dark Gaze. As long as Umbreon is in the active spot, all bench Pokemon have no abilities, which is very good. Considering that Muck is out of the format, this is a great alternate to the Muck from Fossil and can really put in some work. And then it has Sharp Claws. For 1 darkness, 1 color, it does 10 damage, and if you flip a coin, get heads, it does 30 more. So really, the base power is 20 damage, and then it could do 30 more, which 2 for 5 or 2 for 50 is really good. And then if you use the second colorless as another darkness, you're doing 30, and then the potential to do 60 is there, which 2 for 60 is crazy. But really, what makes this card stand out is its ability, and for that, I'm going to be putting it in A tier. And then finally, we have the last of the Skyridge Eeveelutions. We have Vaporeon. Once again, self-healing, water energy, heals from status conditions. This Vaporeon is immediately worse than the other Skyridge Eeveelutions, just because of its first attack with 2 colorless, does 10 damage. Hypno Splash says that offending Pokemon is now asleep. And if it was any other status condition, this would be an okay attack. 2 energy, 10, status condition, guaranteed, sure. But asleep is probably the worst status condition in all of Pokemon, especially the WotC era, though. Asleep is just not that good when there's so many better options in the WotC era. So I just really don't like that first attack. And then it has Aqua Trick. It does 40 damage for 1 water, 2 colorless, and then you can move an energy attached to the defending Pokemon to one of their bench Pokemon. It's fine at best. It is an attack that is fine. It doesn't really accomplish anything, which is my problem. It is a decent manner of control, I guess, if you could move a special energy attached to the defending Pokemon to another, like say a darkness energy to one of their bench Pokemon to make it poisoned. But that is like the one application I can think of where this attack is actually pretty good. But unlike the Rocket On format, the Neo to Skyridge format is not as crazy with the dark Pokemon. There are other options to play, so it's not as guaranteed that you'll be able to pull that off. It's still a decent attack, but I'm going to have to put it in D tier for that. Next up, we have Lieutenant Surge's Eevee from Gym Challenge. Now, this Eevee, similar to the Rocket Eevee, has slightly modified stats in just that it has 10 less HP. However, this Eevee has a really nice first attack. For one colorless, Surprise lets you look at a random card from your opponent's hand, and then your opponent shuffles that card into his or her deck. In the early game, this can be very good for gathering information, as well as disrupting your opponent throughout the entirety of the game. And then its second attack, for two colorless, Scratch does 20 damage, which 2 for 20 isn't particularly great, but it's about middle of the road for what you'd expect for colorless damage. And considering that double colorless is still available in base through gym, at least in that format, this is a very solid Eevee. Considering that is also a card that is legal in Rocket On / Rocket Through Destiny or whatever, Scratch looks okay at best. There's a lot of other Pokemon that have 20 damage for 2 colorless, and unfortunately in the Rocket On format there are just way better things you can be doing. However, there aren't many attacks like that first one, and it does have the weak to fighting and resist psychic as well, so because of that, I am leaning pretty high on this card, and I think I'm going to put it pretty high up on the C tier, probably right after Umbreon from Neo Discovery. Like I said, we'll be making adjustments towards the end of the video, so not everything is going to be the same, especially because looking at this card and the Team Rocket Eevee, it's clear which one is the 40 HP superior. The only downside of this card is really the fact that it can't evolve into any of the other Eeveelutions like the rest of the Eevees can, because of the fact that it has Lieutenant Surge in its name. But what it can evolve into is pretty good, because its evolution is Lieutenant Surge's Jolteon, which has 70 HP, is weak to fighting, and has a retreat cost of 1. So Jolteon's first attack is going along the same lines of the Lieutenant Surge's Eevee's first attack, where it is just intended for disruption. For a lightning and a colorless, high voltage does 20 damage, and then you flip a coin. If heads, your opponent can't play trainers next turn, which damage plus no trainers is really good. I mean, Psyduck from Fossil has Headache, which does the same thing but doesn't do any damage, and then Dark Vileplume has it as an ability, but being able to do damage and disrupt your opponent is pretty crazy in the WotC era. Especially base gym, it's basically unheard of outside of status conditions being applied as well as damage. And then its second attack is not quite as good. For 3 lightning, Thunderflare is basically just a really cracked out rage attack. It does 30 damage and then 10 more damage for each damage counter on Jolteon. But then on a coin flip, it does 30 damage to itself if you get tails, which really sucks, especially for a rage type strategy. You don't want to be doing damage to yourself when your damage counters are basically part of your resource management, where you have to make sure that the only time you're receiving damage counters is when it's crucial for your strategy. So it's a very good attack to start with, but it means that your Lieutenant Surge's Jolteon is probably going to be KO'd early. However, because of its first attack and it's still being a decent second attack as well as the rest of its stat lineup, I still think this Jolteon is pretty good and probably the best Jolteon. So for that, I am putting it into B tier. I think it's probably not as good as the rest of the cards in B tier, but it is definitely better than all of the cards in C tier. Next up, we have the original Eevee from Jungle. Now, this has the exact standard lineup since it created the starting line for all of the other Eevees to follow. But its first attack for one colorless, Tail Wag, makes you flip a coin, and then if heads, the defending Pokemon can't attack next turn, which is fine, especially for base through jungle. It is okay at best, but the fact that Switch is in the format, and then you get to base through gym where Switch and Warp Point are in the format, there are just too many opportunities for your opponent to get out of that situation where they can still attack you, where I feel like it's kind of a useless attack outside of the very beginning of the game. And it also has Quick Attack, which I've talked about a little bit with the non-holo Neo Discovery Eeveelutions, but Quick Attack is the standard attack that each of the Eevee and Eeveelutions get for jungle, where it's 2 colorless, does 10 damage, and then on a coin flip does 20 more. Which honestly, because of the fact that in base through gym double colorless is available, it's a fine attack where sometimes you're doing 30 damage for a single energy attachment, but most of the time you're going to be doing 10 damage, which is okay. Realistically, it is just okay. So honestly, even though this was the original Eevee, it didn't do a great job at setting a precedent for the rest of the Eevees. And for that reason, I'm going to be putting it in D tier. So next we have the Flareon from Jungle, and the Flareon has 70 HP, weak to water, retreat cost of 1, and it has the Quick Attack as its first attack, as we just discussed. But then it also has Flamethrower for 2 fire, 2 colorless. It does 60 damage, but you have to discard a fire, which for 4 energy, Flamethrower is an awful attack in base through gym. And unfortunately, that is the only format where this card is legal, and it's really just not that good. Unfortunately, it's not a high enough HP Pokemon to be sitting there and trying to do quick attacks over and over again while you're waiting to build up Flamethrower. 60 damage doesn't even knock out any of the Haymaker Pokemon. It is kind of an abysmal attack. Somehow, though, it is still better than the Eevee Aquapolis, so I'm going to be putting it in D tier, but among the lowest so far. And then we have Jolteon from Jungle. So the Jolteon from Jungle, 70 HP, weak to fighting, retreat cost of 1. Has the Quick Attack as its first attack, but then its second attack actually kind of makes it pretty good. For 2 lightning, 1 colorless, it does 20 damage, and then you flip 4 coins. It does 20 damage for each of those coin flips. So I guess I should have rephrased that a little bit. It doesn't do 20 damage base. It does 20 damage times the number of heads. So there is a potential to get 0, but there's also the potential to get 80 for 3 damage, which 80 for 3 damage is pretty much unheard of in the WotC era, especially based through gym. So it's pretty good, but most of the time you're going to be doing 20 to 60 damage, and 40 is probably about your average, I suppose. So since 40 for 3 is an okay attack, if that's what it was, the fact that there's the potential to do 20 or 0 with no added benefit, whereas it could be a crazy attack, I think most of the time, since both attacks rely on coin flips, the fact that half the time you're going to be doing nothing is not that good. So I'm going to be putting it in D tier. Last of the jungles, we have Vaporeon. So this Vaporeon actually gets 10 extra HP as opposed to the rest of the jungle Eeveelutions. And then it has a weakness of lightning and a retreat cost of 1. Has the quick attack as its first attack. And then it has Water Gun, which is the standard for Rain Dance decks, where it's 2 water, 1 colorless, 30 damage, and then does 10 damage for each extra water energy attached, not used to pay for this attack's cost, with a maximum of 50 damage. 5 for 50 is not good at all. The fact that it still has somewhat reliable damage with quick attack and even water gun makes it not unplayable, but it's really not a card that is, in my opinion, something you should consider a build around, and there's not really any other deck it fits into outside of Rain Dance or, of course, Eeveetron. But considering the fact that outside of base set, Rain Dance never really accomplished much, and Eeveetron literally never accomplished much. And I know we're not judging based off of decks that they're in, but taking in the fact that those are the only decks that would consider playing this card, it's going to find its way at the bottom of D tier. So unfortunately, Jungle, despite debuting Eevee and its evolutions for the first time. All of them are pretty bad cards, but luckily, obviously, as you can see, they built off of that and made them much better cards for the most part. Let's continue on with the last of the archetypal Eevee and Eeveelutions with Light Eeveelution, starting with Light Flareon. Light Flareon has 80 HP, which is the highest HP of any Flareon, is weak to water, and a retreat cost of 1. It has Warm Up for 1 colorless, which allows you to search your deck for a fire energy and attach it to one of your benched Pokemon. Energy Acceleration is extremely rare in the WotC era, and that is a very good attack to have. Then it has Burning Flames for 2 fire, 1 colorless, does 30 damage. And then you flip 2 coins. For each heads, you have to discard a fire energy from Light Flareon, but the attack does 20 more damage. So if both of them are heads, you're doing 70 for 3 energy. Discarding 2, sure, but you only ever had 3 energy attached. And then if tails, it's just an attack for 3 energy that does 30, which isn't good necessarily, and it's kind of a little bit below average, but in Neon or even Rocket through Neo, it's pretty okay. Honestly, its first attack makes it much better, but having that second attack with the potential to do 70 or even 50, just discarding 1, makes it just Flamethrower, is pretty good. So it's definitely the best Flareon, and for that, I'm going to be putting it in B tier. Next, we have Light Jolteon, which has 70 HP, which we already have Jolteons with 70, so I would have liked to seen the extra 10 HP, but it gets a benefit somewhere else in that it has a free retreat cost. It's still weak to fighting, obviously, but it has a free retreat cost, which, as we've discussed, free retreat cost in the WotC era is bananas and always very important, and typically bumps a card's rank up by quite a lot. Then it has Pulse Guard as an attack for 1 lightning, which during your opponent's next turn, if 30 or more damage is done to Light Jolteon, prevent that damage, which is a very good stall option, especially for like the mid game, I'd say. Then we have Thunder Needle for 2 lightning and a colorless. You flip 3 coins, does 20 damage for each heads. Then if you get 2 or more heads, the defending Pokemon is paralyzed, which is an insane upgrade from the Pin Missile that we see on the Jungle Jolteon. Now, paralysis plus doing a lot of damage is pretty rare. I can only think of like 1 Pokemon in the Neo era that has that, and I'm pretty sure that's Ampharos, but the free retreat cost 2 is actually kind of insane. This Pokemon is a very good option, kind of just all around. I feel like the only thing that would make it better is if instead of Pulse Guard as an attack, it had that as an ability, and that would basically make it a guaranteed A or S tier, but unfortunately, since it doesn't, it's going to find its way into the B tier, but probably right at the top of B tier. It's really close to being A tier. It's just the fact that Pulse Guard is an attack, and it's not guaranteed that you're preventing the damage. That kind of sets me back from it. Finally, of the light Pokemon, we have Light Vaporeon, which has 80 HP, weak to lightning, and a retreat cost of 1. So it didn't get an HP buff from the original jungle, nor did it get a free retreat like Light Jolteon. So already its stat lineup not looking very good for a light Pokemon, but let's see how it weighs in as an evolution. For 1 water energy, you can Wash Away. Choose one of your benched Pokemon and remove all damage counters from it, as well as discard all energy cards attached to it. It's basically a localized version of Pokemon Center, and as an attack, I really don't think it's that good, especially considering that you could be healing one of your Pokemon while getting knocked out the next turn. And the fact that it discards all energy is really what sets me back from it. It is in the Neo era, so energy removals aren't as prevalent, but Neo through Skyridge, there are energy removal options, and unfortunately, that means that you're going to have a hard time setting up if you're sort of building around this card. If it didn't remove the energy, or if it was an ability, I would see it as so much better. But unfortunately, since it doesn't do either of those things, it's really not a good attack in my opinion. Then it has Hypno Shower. For 2 water and 1 colorless, it does 30 damage, and then remove 1 damage counter from each bench Pokemon, as well as making the defending Pokemon asleep. So removing 1 from each bench Pokemon
includes your opponents, obviously. And not that 10 damage is a lot. Obviously, it's literally just one damage counter. But in the WotC era, one damage counter can mean the difference, especially if you're playing against a deck like Fortress or any sort of damage counter related deck that just revolves around spreading them as much as possible. It can be life or death. On top of that, the Pokemon that you're attacking becomes asleep as opposed to any other status condition is really frustrating, especially since the attack is called Hypno Shower. I feel like Confusion would work just as well here, and if it was Confusion, once again, that would be an insane difference where that would bump this card up like 2 tiers. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And we're looking at our worst Vaporeon as well as our worst Eeveelution, as this is going to the bottom of F tier. Alright, and finally we are on the last card. This is the WotC Promo Eevee, and spoilers, this one is pretty good. It has 30 HP, which is the worst of any Eeveelution by far, 20 less than the average Eevee. It has a weakness to fighting, resists Psychic, but it has free retreat cost, which is the only Eevee to have free retreat cost, which is why its HP is so abysmally low. But it makes up for it in every other way. It has Chain Reaction as a Poke Power, which allows it to search your deck for an Eeveelution and place it on Eevee whenever a Pokemon evolves. That's whether it's on your turn, your opponent's turn, it doesn't matter. If a Pokemon evolves, you can just right then and there search your deck for an Eeveelution and place it on top of Eevee, and it counts as an evolution. This is really important considering the fact that you have so many options to choose from, and also, since it has 30 HP, that means if your opponent tries to evolve to knock it out quickly, you can evolve right there as well and make it so your opponent can't knock you out. But on top of that, it also has an amazing attack itself. Bite does 20 damage for a single colorless energy. It is the only attack that I'm aware of in at least base through gym for a single colorless that does 20 damage without some sort of drawback. So with all of that in mind, this card is essential to any Eeveetron deck, but more importantly, the best Eevee or Eeveelution card in the WotC era, and is the only S tier, as I am considering that the best card of the list. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to do some final adjustments, and then we can talk about the tier list. Alright, final adjustments were made. I think all I really did was move the Lieutenant Surge's Eevee to the top of C tier, and I moved the Rocket Eevee to the top of D tier. Overall, it kind of surprised me how good a lot of the Eeveelutions really are when looked at with a magnifying glass. Even though Eeveetron as a deck never really kicked off, it is really impressive to see how good some of these cards are, and it's amazing that they haven't really been fully taken advantage of. And I know that Eevee and all of its Eeveelutions are some of the most beloved Pokemon, so hopefully people won't get too mad at me for potentially rating one of their favorite cards very negatively. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please make sure to leave a like. Let me know how you felt about the video or what your thoughts were in the comments below, and consider subscribing to see more content just like this, as well as all sorts of WotC era and modern era Pokemon TCG content. Hope you have a good one. See ya.